Good morning, everybody. I'm Irina, Slavina from Blue Systems. We are a data aggregation partner to cities and mobility companies around the world. And I'm thrilled to be here today moderating a panel of these distinguished experts. As you all know, the data revolution has allowed cities to analyze mobility trends and patterns and run safer, more sustainable, and more efficient mobility programs. How is digital infrastructure being used to manage the equitable distribution of mobility assets and improve the efficient use of curb space? With the city becoming increasingly multimodal, how far can we expand MDS, CDS, and other open data standards to include everything that moves within city limits? I hope to shine the light on these questions. It is very personal to me, not only as Blue Systems team member, but a long-time resident of Los Angeles and a beneficiary of many mobility modes that we have here. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce our panel today, but I wanted to add a little personal touch to it, just so you get to know them a little bit better. And so I asked them all to let me know their favorite NFL team, because the season is in full swing. But what I was surprised to learn that some of them wanted to talk about MLS and World Cup better than NFL, which is always great, actually. So we have Andrew Glass-Hastings next to me, Executive Director of Open Mobility Foundation, and a huge soccer fan, and a season ticket holder to Seattle's soccer team. And I want to know if anybody in the audience knows who that is. Seattle's, no one is here from Seattle. Oh, please. Yes. Oh, great job. So having served for 2 Seattle mayors, led one of the most innovative city DOT teams, and advised cities around the globe, Andrew has extensive experience working at the intersection of public and private sectors. As the Open Mobility Foundation's executive director, Andrew leads this unique public-private partnership where members collaborate to produce the open source data standards and software tools that cities use to manage their mobility and curb. Next up is Nathan Berry, executive. Nathan is Executive Vice President of Strategic Sales at Passport and a lifelong fan of New York Giants. Is there anybody else here that likes the Giants? Oh, yeah. Excellent. Nathan has been part of the Passport sales organization since the company conception in 2011. You've been with the company for over 10 years. He was an integral part in leading and developing one of the fastest growing sales teams in parking industry. And indeed, Nathan is well known in the industry as an expert in both parking and technology. Next, we have Vignesh Ganapathy, Vice President of Public Policy at Serve Robotics, cheering for Toronto in the MLS and Canada in the World Cup. Vignesh leads public affairs engagement for the future of robotic on-demand delivery. He most recently served on the public policy teams at Match Group and Postmates, where his work was focused on privacy, robotics, mobility, and how tech integrates within our communities. Vignesh also serves on the board of 2 nonprofits dedicated to voter engagement and outreach. Both of the companies did incredibly well, as you told me, in this election cycle. And last but not least, we have Clay Garner, Chief Innovation Officer at the City of San Jose and a fan of the Miami Dolphins. Clay's mission is to leverage the ingenuity of Silicon Valley to improve residents' livelihood, access to opportunities, and city experience. As the top tech policy unit in the city, Clay's team has rolled out San Jose's first digital privacy policy, developed a new data science capacity building initiative to improve city services, and deploy transportation pilots in traffic safety and autonomous vehicles. And San Jose, under Clay's leadership, was named the nation's most innovative local government both in 2020 and 2021. It's very impressive. And so, great to be here with all of you today. I'm gonna actually sit down to start the conversation. And to start us off, I would like to address my first question to you, Clay. We've heard that San Jose is indeed one of the most innovative cities, not in the nation, but in the world. And you very often are in the forefront of adopting cutting-edge technologies. And in fact, both Nathan's company and mine are very humbled and honored to provide our tech to San Jose. But what opportunities does the city see in leveraging data for emerging modes like curb management, like autonomous transit, autonomous robots, eVTOLs, however far you want to take it?
It's a giant question, and it's great to be here and great to meet you all. And with our partners, it's great to always have the opportunity to reflect on what's interesting. So, like many cities, we're producing and ingesting data on just an epic scale, and it's every single year there's more sensors, more just data sets that we have to be able to make sense of, whether it's the smartphone in a car that's got navigation apps, or sensors on a garbage truck, or automated license plate readers like we're rolling out in the city. We need to actually be able to take all of these disparate data streams and create some kind of picture that's useful and that also takes into account the equity issues, because we know that data is not collected nor used in a necessarily equitable way when it comes to planning and policy around transportation. And one thing, Irina, I know you mentioned our privacy policy, but there's so much data out there and there's so much interest in being able to leverage data for mobility, especially for people and residents' experience. And without the safeguards in place, it just becomes really difficult for us to build that trust. And we really care about that at the city, so we passed our first digital privacy policy in 2021. We're working to operationalize that with all the systems that we're working with. And thankfully, we've got great vendors that have been willing to take that leap with us out in the public and show people that we care about this issue. And I was just thinking about like the data collection issue for equity, because the systems that are collecting all of the data and that it's actually most interesting perhaps for our planners, we know that it's not actually representative of the whole city. People in poorer neighborhoods, for example, tend to drive older cars. They're not producing the same quantity of data, and that's also where we have most of the safety issues and the most severe Vision Zero challenges. So we've got to do better in terms of how do we use data to create a picture of the city which is actually useful to rectifying some of the issues that have been systemic in our planning and policy in the past.
This is wonderful. This is exactly what everybody is talking, and you're doing such a wonderful job spearheading this effort along with other cities here in California, at least, and the cities that are members of the OMF. Vicky, moving over to you, a lot of cities see challenges in deploying technology every day, especially with new modes arriving, like e-bikes, robots now, e-scooters. How can planners and transportation engineers navigate the field that seems like increasingly overcrowded?
Yeah, it's a good question. Also, thanks to CoMotion for having us here. So a little bit of background in terms of Serve Robotics. We started as the Special Projects Division of Postmates back in 2017, and in 2021 we were spun out as an independent company that focuses primarily on autonomous delivery on sidewalks. We're currently active on a commercial basis in the LA area, West Hollywood specifically, and I think we've had a ton of learnings over the last couple of years, from really the 60s through the 21st century. There was a period in which big box retail was sort of churning the business communities of cities across the United States, and we've kind of seen this sort of nice pushback to that in the 21st century, where there are a lot more sort of boutique businesses, mixed use spaces that have started to come up. But what that's also been reflected in is how on-demand delivery itself has started to become much more about what can I get from my community. If I need to get a toolkit, would I rather get it on Amazon, or would it be possible for me to get it on demand from the Ace Hardware co-op that's up the street and keep that capital flowing within my community? And so this presents both, a challenge and opportunity, like most of these sorts of shifts. And as a result, for us, we've, coming up within Postmates, what we saw was that 50% of Postmates deliveries in LA were shorter than 1 mile. That means that there is a car that's going and picking up a burrito and then transporting that burrito 5 blocks, looking for parking again, and then dropping it off. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You're using more energy to move the car. It's not, for many of the people who are working those jobs, they're trying to stitch together something that's going to pay them well, but the person that wants to order that burrito is not going to spend more than $3 to make it happen. But at the same time, people do deserve the ability to access those goods within their community. So for us, we really saw a sidewalk AV as a way to address that problem. But what it's presented is that when we go to cities say, what is this? When they look at it, they see half AV, they see half electric scooter, because that's what people have experience with. But it's kind of neither, because the rules of the road are kind of built. So for AVs just really need to learn how to expect how other drivers operate. We need to figure out how to expect what people walking down the street are going to do. We need to know how a dog's going to behave when we're operating, and then develop a codex, some type of shared language that we can use to signal intent, and how we're operating in that space. And unlike scooters, which really rely on sort of induced demand to operate, which is really, like you put as many scooters on the road as possible, and then it's convenient for everyone to use them. For us, it really doesn't work that way, because we are displacing existing car trips. So every single delivery that's done by a robot currently would have been done by an automobile here in LA. So that presents, a challenge for the city to address, but I think LA has done a very good job of navigating this, both through data platforms like MDS, but additionally through figuring out frameworks that allow you to pilot the technology and then go from pilot to commercial operation, because I think that's another challenge that a lot of cities see. But this is going to continue to be an area of conflict. Ours isn't going to be the last new device that's going to operate in these rights of way. And I think for folks who are operators in this space, it's important to realize who else is affected by the friction that you see. If a robot can't cross the street safely, it's likely that someone in a wheelchair can't cross that street safely either. And what that means for us is we need to have an open door policy in terms of the challenges we face, and work with cities and other community members to address challenges so that we can create communities that benefit us all.
So Vicky, I have to say, to your credit, you just gave a clearer and more compelling argument for sidewalk delivery robots than I've heard in the past 2 years. So kudos to you. That was great.
No, that was really, really compelling to me too. And again, as a beneficiary of your services here in LA, I'm really proud, Angelina, to see robots on our streets actually. And Nathan, moving to you, as a technology provider to cities, how important is data in terms of creating some sort of KPIs and measurements for city data analytics?
Sure. Thank you, Irina. As you mentioned at the beginning, Passport has been around for about 10 years. And if you think, and we work primarily in the parking space. And if you think about parking over the course of the last 10 years, it was just 10 years ago that multiple major cities, the way that you paid for parking was you were putting a coin into a meter.
Right.
It wasn't digitized, it wasn't electronic payments, anything like that. And so even if you just think about the arc of the last 10 years, and as the ability for a parking organization or a DOT to be able to use data has gone through a massive transformation, even starting from almost zero, having very little data to work with, and then having this influx of data, and then having any kind of concept of how do I even use this data, right? And so now I think what we're seeing is DOTs using that data to set the KPIs. So you've got to have the data at the beginning so that you even know how to even begin to set the goals. And so we're seeing DOTs becoming more and more strategic around those KPIs and connecting them to the broader goals of the cities around sustainability and equity on the curb. And data is what allows a city or a DOT to be able to set the appropriate KPIs, monitor against those KPIs, and then maybe most importantly, to then tell that story to the public, to begin to broaden access and really begin to evaluate against where we're going.
Basically, create smart parking policies based on data. Give me one example. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No, that's okay. So for an example, in parking, a big conversation right now is how do we make sure that everyone has access to be able to pay for parking,
Okay.
right? And so as a company who provides a mobile payment option, we still see goals and things set around, we still do need a cash or coin option to be able to pay for parking. But then also, as you maintain that while moving more digital, then you can become a bit more expansive of what digital offerings that you have. And so being able to have, just in the same way a city previously might have had 2 different types of parking meters or 2 different brands, now you can have multiple options to digitally pay. So whether it's through an app, whether it's through a text to pay, whether it's through whatever the case may be, mobility wallets. So we're starting to see a lot of that.
For the purposes of the convenience of end user eventually.
That's right,
And
that's
equitable
right.
access to the
Yeah.
curb. That's great. That's great. Really appreciate what you're doing. And Andrew, finally, to kind of glue all these pieces together. So you lead this organization where both public and private members work together. And we at Blue Systems are very proud member of the OMF, but what are the responsibilities of the public and private sectors to create the outcomes we would like with respect to digital infrastructure and code?
Excellent. Well, Irina, thanks thanks for the opportunity to be here, and it's always a fun panel, especially surrounded by familiar faces. Blue Systems, Passport, City of San Jose, great members of the Open Mobility Foundation. Viggy, we'll call you a friend of the Open Mobility Foundation. It's like working towards good friends, working towards membership. Excellent. But the Open Mobility Foundation is only about a little more than 3 years old now, but it has proven very quickly to be a really valuable forum for public and private collaboration. And it is an organization where mostly at this point cities, counties, MPOs are coming together with private mobility, technology-oriented companies to create open source data standards and software tools that cities are using with their private sector partners to address some really significant mobility challenges in the public right-of-way. And so cities, we pretty much have decided as a society that cities are going to be responsible for planning, managing, and regulating the public streets in those cities. And there's other agencies involved, but by and large, it's the cities that have that responsibility. And they've done, I think we could argue how well of a job they've done, but they've used the tools that they've had to manage traffic and transportation on the street, as well as they could. And by and large, up until relatively recently, that was reliant on traffic signals and signs and street markings. But now mobility is so much more than that. There's so much more of a digital interface. Whether we're trying to take a shared electric scooter or use Lyft or Uber or pay for parking with an app, there's now so much more of a digital interface to mobility. And cities need the tools to be able to continue to play that fundamental role of planner, manager, and regulator of the public right-of-way. And so it is actually a really rich experiment here that we're a part of, bringing together the public and private sector around this opportunity of creating the open source data standards that will allow cities to partner with the private sector to be able to do things like manage new modes, like for example, electric scooters, or new modes like sidewalk delivery robots.
That's right.
That modes that just a few years ago didn't exist. and building standards that will allow both cities to be able to receive information from the operators that they need to be able to hold those operators accountable to following the rules, following the kind of rules of the road that Viggy mentioned. But then also to be able to push policy in a digital format back to those operators to be able to adjust to the changing needs of a dynamic urban street and right of way. And so as needs change around geofence zones that because of a parade, a city doesn't want scooters or perhaps sidewalk delivery robots in that area. That geofence zone can be pushed dynamically out to those operators as an expression of the city's need to manage this new service on the street. And we're really created the mobility data specification, which is that standard, in a as flexible way as possible so that it can continue to evolve as mobility evolves on the street. One of the things we haven't had a chance to talk too much about, but just a few months ago, we released, really in partnership with our public and private members, the curb data specification. A tool that now is allowing cities to digitize their curb and be able to deploy strategies to better manage that curb in ways that they haven't had before. And it's going to allow them to get so much more out of this incredibly precious resource that they have. I mean, I think the curb space in cities is an underappreciated asset that cities have. Perhaps some of the most valuable real estate in cities today. And the demands on that have increased so much, even during the pandemic. And so really, when you talk about kind of responsibilities in public and private sector, I mean, the Open Mobility Foundation is kind of where the rubber meets the road on that shared responsibility. And that's what's so exciting.
And it's incredible how much has been achieved in the short 3 years, and especially since you have joined. So thank you for everything that you do, because I think we all, as members to this ecosystem, benefit from it, and ultimately as residents of our respective cities.
Do you think there's a future, Andrew, where cities that are doing a really good job who are in OMF, in managing their curb, that kind of policy insight can be weighted or shared with other cities in the network? So it's like, if LA is doing a super good job at curb management, like all of a sudden San Jose can just integrate some of those policies. I feel like that would be super cool.
Absolutely. I think that is it's an opportunity within the Open Mobility Foundation and the group of cities that we have as members, but then also as users. Because as an open source organization, you don't have to be a member to benefit from the standards and the tools that the organization is working collaboratively to create. Now, what we're up against, and especially when I put my former Seattle DOT hat on, we got to find a way to help each other set aside sort of the special butterfly syndrome that I like to think about, because I was guilty of this far too many times. Well, we can't do what San Jose does. We're Seattle. Like, we need the Seattle solution. But by and large, I mean, I think, as you know, I mean, the problems that cities are trying to solve have way more in common than not. And so focusing on what sort of that unites cities in that problem and the opportunity to solve it, rather than thinking about how different or unique cities are. There will always be unique contexts. There'll always be unique kind of community attributes that will shape the ultimate policies or solutions. But fundamentally, there's a lot more in common than not.
I'll just say that our privacy policy is conspicuously quite similar to that of Seattle. So if you read it, I think you'd think it's a little copy-pasted, but to your point, there's just way too much siloization given the similarities that most of these large cities share.
It's going to be interesting to see as cities begin to be able to anonymize their data to be able to then share it. So if you're not sharing the exact data set, but you can anonymize it to give it, to be able to share it more broadly without violating privacy policies.
Right.
One other quick response to that, and then I'll be quiet for a second. But so we have 9 of the OMF member cities, including San Jose, are working together on a collaborative application for the US DOT SMART grant, and that means each of them are submitting their own application, but they're working as a collaborative. And I don't think anybody necessarily expects that all 9 of those cities are going to be selected by US DOT. But if a subset of them are, then they will be able to share and collaborate across all 9 as that group will kind of remain intact, because of they're using across all 9 the curb data specification. They're all focused on ways of improving curb management, improving safety outcomes or climate outcomes in their, or even congestion outcomes in their cities. And so we want to make sure that we don't lose the value of that collective group of cities, even if only a subset of them actually win the grant. We want to make sure that they can all continue to learn from each other and benefit from the collaborative.
Oh, that's wonderful. And actually, the next question I wanted to ask you way later in this conversation, but it kind of organically got into this, and thanks to your question, Clay. I hear what Andrew is saying, and it seems to me that it would be really great if all cities spoke the same digital language. Wouldn't it be much easier for both cities and private operators to operate everywhere where we would all be subjected to the same set of rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure how many of you have been coming to these sorts of events over the course of the last decade or so, but there was a time where there would be panels like this talking about curb modernization, and honestly, I had no idea what they were talking about. It was just, people would just say we're modernizing the curb as though you're gonna snap your fingers one day and then the sign is gonna flip from parking to loading zone. And then there were, you'd go out to the exhibit hall and there would be 13, 14 companies that would be trying to sell every city on their standard. And they'd be like, we're going to solve this problem for you. And look, not to poo-poo, all the companies that are doing a lot of innovative stuff in this space, but as a private operator, we were not going to go and contract with 13 different companies to figure out how to do this with all the cities we're operating in. It doesn't make any sense. And I think tech companies face this often, is that other tech companies will try and sell them on something. It's just this big arbitrage game. And mobility started to really kind of feel like that. The advantage of platforms like MDS and the curb data specification is that for the first time we've sort of moved away from that. And we are actually only now figuring out what curb modernization actually is, which is it's about figuring out what that shared language looks like so that from the private operator side, we don't have to keep doing ad hoc one-offs with each one of the areas in which we operate. When Serve was inside of Postmates, we did we would share data with San Francisco's CTA, and we were really excited and gung-ho about the curb, and we shared where our import and export zones were, and we were like, this is going to be really helpful for the city. But the city looked at it and they were like, we have no idea what to do with this. And we were like, we're trying to be good partners, and yeah, it made a good story because most of the time, I'm doing lobbying stuff. But I think when it comes to actually thinking through ways in which we can take what we talk about in here and apply it, you need these sorts of standards and these opportunities to raise that, and consistency, because we're actually seeing in the car charging space right now, where with EVs. But imagine if every one of our cars, like my Subaru, I had to go to a different gas station than the Honda. It'd be a nightmare. And sometimes mobility can feel like that. And I think having standards for this is incredibly important. I want to, if I take my phone to another country, I got to get an adapter. But imagine if you needed adapters to go down the street, right? We really should. I think employing these sorts of standards has a tremendous effect and is very helpful for operators that are looking for sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. And then for cities, hopefully you're all able to try things with that data set and then contribute and improve it, so that we can all work on this together.
That's exactly that. I'm going to use your gas station example as I explain MDS and how it works to people who are not yet aware. I think it's really illustrative. Thank you all for your comments. I wanted to change gears a little bit and move the conversation back to you, Clay. You mentioned equity considerations as you adopt new technology and leverage technology, but what about safety? Safety, I know, is on top of your mind as well, and this is something that I personally know of your very ambitious Vision Zero plan that has been adopted or enacted several years ago. And how do you leverage data to achieve safer mobility within San Jose?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Vision Zero is it's not working. We're not anywhere near zero. It's, in fact, we invest in different interventions, and the reality is, I think this is going to be the worst year for pedestrian fatalities, and it's just absolutely tragic to have this happen in the city, especially when we're trying to push people towards walking and cycling, and they don't feel safe at all. And it's actually an interesting problem because it's one of the few areas where I feel like there isn't enough data still. Everything else in mobility, it's like there's so much data and there's so many different data streams, and it's about integrating it. And for us, with this issue, we've been thinking about how do we actually create the data that would be useful to understanding the problem more, given what's actually available to us as potential interventions as a city. So we've been doing a pilot with a company called Velodyne, which you probably know, in San Jose at one of our most sort of dangerous intersections. And we're trying to collect near-miss data. So the thought is, we know when these collisions happen because we get the accident report, but we don't actually know all the times it almost happens, which is probably most of the data. So that has been really useful, setting up that system and just starting to have a better picture of like how this happens over time, over different weather conditions, and what are the nature of these almost collisions, so we can either design streets better or figure out some policy intervention, potentially place law enforcement at times when we know people are running red lights and driving really dangerously to deter that kind of behavior. But really a challenge. We're looking at things like risk terrain modeling, which is really exciting to think, what are the actual features in a qualitative way that are most likely to produce the negative events that we're trying to mitigate against. So in the future, we would hope that when we're doing like building permitting for fast food, for example, if we know that if you put a Starbucks, entrance or exit like at the intersection, then that for some reason produces like a higher likelihood of pedestrian collisions. Therefore, we should not, allow that type of, physical environment change, or at least we should be really cautious about how we do that. So that's all really interesting. I also think like there's so many tools that we could leverage way better as cities. So how do we meet people where they are in terms of the digital infrastructure side? So everyone is driving around with smartphones, they're using navigation apps. How come we can't work with like a Waze or Google Maps to proactively, notify people that, hey, this is an intersection where 10 people have died in the last year. You should really slow down. And maybe that behavioral nudging works. It's kind of not clear from the research how effective it is. So again, we have to be very judicious as a city in what we're investing in and what we actually tell the public we're trying to do, because this is an issue of utmost sensitivity and tragedy.
This is really interesting what you're saying.
So here's an interesting thought experiment, and like legally, it's probably several legal catalogs deep to explore. But so the cities also, in managing the right of way, set speed limits, and then there's the expectation that they enforce the speed. But we know that that's really challenging to do because it takes a lot of personnel to actually be there to see the person who's speeding and then pull them over and give them a citation. You also create impacts to traffic while you're trying to pull the person over. Now, there's technologies that can automate this process, of course, but there are potential issues with that as well. But I want to go back to the speed limit for a second, because this is where if cities, in setting the speed, what if cities can actually do more than just tell us what the speed should be, but actually kind of dictate speed through actually controlling? I mean, we have most cars, especially as they're in the past few years going forward, they have the onboard technology to govern the speed. And we know we can create geofences around that dictate certain speeds. So perhaps around in certain dangerous intersections, or even pedestrian school zones, or neighborhoods, or dense pedestrian environments, that actually slows the vehicles down automatically.
It's interesting. So on the private operator side, Clay, you might actually enjoy this because the most common accident that happens with delivery robots is the right hook turn that a car takes and hits a parallel moving device, which is actually the most common accident that happens to cyclists and to pedestrians and to everybody else. And we actually, since we experienced that, we do have a ton of data in terms of both the actual incidents that happen and the near misses. And so right now, in our operation in West Hollywood, we actually work with the city at length about this, and we'll share out what our learnings are. We actually mentioned recently that there's an intersection in which cars are frequently going over the speed limit. There's quite a bit of confusion at this intersection, and that we avoid crossing there just because it seems risky. But we have access to the city council and to the staff, and we're able to talk to them. But many of the folks who are affected by what happens at that intersection might not realize it, and they might not actually have the opportunity to get out in front of those people. So it gives us an opportunity to work with those communities to try and improve that intersection. But additionally, one way in which we can make operation of delivery robots safe, but it's not just operation of delivery robots, is really, I think, changing street design, right? Like moving away from sort of the strode design that we see in many cities. And I grew up in the South Bay, so I know that it's endemic in San Jose. That's something that will help us operate, but it has downstream effects for many communities that will benefit from those improvements. So I think I would definitely urge private operators to think through this, because it can be very easy to just think about your bottom line in terms of what's going on, but having sort of a forward-looking vision of what the city can look like in a way that doesn't leave people behind, I think it should really be a focal point of private operations as you seek to grow.
Thanks for your comment, Viggy. Nathan, I want to turn to you. So you've been a technology partner to cities for over a decade, and I'm sure you have seen challenges that transportation officials are facing back then and now. So how do the cities use technology now to address problems and challenges that they have?
Well, I think, this is such an interesting conversation because
I'm learning so much, actually.
Yeah. And when you start, and I think this is such a great testament to the work that OMF does with the MDS and things, where by standardizing the language, it removes an element of complication as it goes as a city. Because you take a person like Clay, who, and we were talking earlier, where he works with us at Passport in the parking space. Parking is like 25% of what Clay does, or whatever the percentage is, and he's got all this other stuff. And so now they're trying to manage, different partners in different spaces, and that's a lot. And so when you can standardize the language, number one, that at least it eliminates or minimizes one aspect of the complexity, because the other piece that, cities deal with are, whatever it is, the goal that they're trying to accomplish. So for us in parking and in the curb, occupancy and wayfinding are such huge things that cities want to solve for, but there's no one vendor or no one technology partner out there who solves that by themselves. And so then now cities are left managing groups of technology partners who are wanting to work together but also competing against each other. And when you put it all up on a giant whiteboard, it's like this massive Venn diagram of partners that all do something unique, but they all overlap with each other. And
The vendor diagram.
That's
the
so
vendor
funny.
diagram. There you go.
When you said there's no one vendor, I was like, what about Blue Systems here?
Yeah. So, really, finding ways to, force technology partners to work together in a way that's productive, and by specifying the specific things that we're trying to solve for, and specifying what your role is in that project, I think is a big challenge that cities face.
No, I fully agree. In fact, as you were speaking, it gave me an idea. I need to approach you after this panel and see what we can do together for cities. Andrew, moving back to you, the whole theme of this CoMotion conference has been multimodal city. But why are we talking about code here in this particular panel? What does code have to do with multimodality?
Well, I mean, a little bit that was mentioned around I mean, it's not standardizing for the sake of standardizing. It's not technology for the sake of technology, but it's actually have a truly multimodal system. You need kind of an ecosystem of providers, and I think that's one of the things that allows that code, if you will, or a data standard has now proven out that it enables that ecosystem to build. And the initial use case for the success of this type of data standard across the U.S. and the world was micromobility. And cities faced there was a point of time. It was kind of that where scooters had appeared on the streets of cities, and some initially high profile cases like right here in L.A. and Santa Monica and then a few others. And then cities had a point of time where they could have just shut the whole thing down because they had that leverage. Unlike some of the previous sort of new modes that appeared on city streets, these were small, lightweight fleets of vehicles that cities could have very easily deployed their public works crews to go around and pick them all up because they were operating illegally, and the micromobility industry could have essentially died before it had a chance to really grow and expand. But in large part, because of the existence of the mobility data specification, what it allowed cities to do in terms of understanding how the scooters and shared bikes were operating on the streets, but also to be able to hold those operators to account for following the city's rules and regulations, and then even further, showing the policymakers how this new mode was allowing them to achieve some of their kind of primary goals around mobility. So you have equity or safety, even just the kind of multimodal nature of helping people leave their cars behind. The data standard helped sort of proof out for those policymakers that this was helping them achieve some of those goals. So this initial use case of a data standard was then kind of allowed scooters to expand around very quickly around the U.S. and around the world, and this is actually where cities did learn from each other. And they're like, oh, I want that, and they actually, some of the early cities started adopting MDS without fully knowing what it was, and they were pointing to the LA's code. They were saying, great, I just want to just in their permit language, they were just saying, just do what LA's doing. And then, of course, LA eventually went, well, hold on a second, maybe that's not what the role we want to play. So then they formed the Open Mobility Foundation, and now we get to steward the standard. We're moving MDS beyond micromobility and getting into passenger services, including taxis and car share and Lyft and Uber services and sidewalk delivery robots, more modes that more people are using. And so this same type of standardization, just in the flow of the data fields and then the actual kind of flow of data is going to allow different modes to be able to appear on the streets, and then cities to continue to be able to play their role as planners, managers, and regulators with the insights that they're getting from that information. So it's not about the actual data standard. It's not actually about the code. It's really about the outcomes and helping cities continue to be in a position to be able to work in partnership with the tech sector to build the ecosystem around this technology that's going to help lead to those outcomes that they want to see.
That's exactly that. And continuing this conversation, I wanted to ask maybe Viggy, you and Clay, from your respective perspectives, what do you think? And Viggy, you already touched on this a little bit. What should private operators do in order to more successfully and more streamlined, in more streamlined way, to pilot? Because you were speaking about piloting as a really easy way to showcase new technology, to pilot and eventually roll out their services in cities, and what other stakeholders should do to help make this happen in order to achieve multimodality.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's a perfect way to do it, because I think we've seen many companies from ride hailing through Airbnb through micromobility platforms all struggle with this in one way or another in terms of what their community engagement looks like. But I do think when you're doing your testing and your design, finding ways to be inclusionary in that process can have tremendous impacts down the line. And I'll give a couple of examples. When we were designing Serve, we did our first pilot launch at a senior living facility up in the Bay Area. We chose it because it's a controlled environment. We knew that there would be 5G and LTE connectivity so that we could monitor the devices. But we were also dealing with populations of folks who may have ambulatory challenges, who are not used to technology serving them. And as a result, we made a number of changes in terms of how the device functions, what its size is, the speed it moves at, and how we communicate in the right of way. And then what we did was, before we rolled out in West Hollywood, we also met with a number of disability rights groups and advocates who came to us and said, you know, we're noticing some challenges in your design. You know, your sound design, for example, if I'm hard of sight, I can't tell whether a device is coming toward me or away from me based upon this constant sound. So we switched to an intermittent sound so that people can use echolocation to figure out which direction the device is moving in. And we haven't really figured out what the standards look like in this space yet. I don't think it's going to come city by city, because that's going to limit which operators are going to be able to get going. But I think over time, there are organizations that are focused on this. There's the Urban Robotics Foundation. There's the International Standards Organization and others. But I do think when you're designing your technology, figuring out ways to be inclusionary there is important. And then the second part of this is we were just talking about codes and language, and there's like code and language in terms of like what's happening in a tech company, and then there's codes and language that you encounter in the real world, which are that when you're outside, cars are required to have turn signals and brake lights and reverse signals, and none of those requirements really existed for micromobility platforms when it started. Cyclists use hand signals, but I don't think, when I've ridden a scooter, there was nothing that told me to use hand signals. And maybe there should be, sorry, like I think there's it's prudent, I think, for all of us as practitioners in this space to think through ways in which we can create that common language. And I think for a sidewalk delivery robot, we designed it with eyes, we designed it with emotions, because that's how people communicate on roadways or on sidewalks. Excuse me, sorry, I'm working right now. Whatever you're trying to convey is really important there. And then we were able to use it even in the design of how we approach an intersection. So when you're coming to a crosswalk, we try not to block the flow of pedestrian traffic. So what we'll do is we'll approach the curb cut, and then we'll reverse. And it signals intent so that people with all around the intersection know that we're planning to cross. It doesn't block the pedestrian right of way, so pedestrians still have priority in that intersection. And ultimately, we wait one light cycle so that we know that we have the full walk signal to be able to cross safely. These were all learnings that we were able to do through a piloting program that we had in West Hollywood. And West Hollywood basically said, look, we'll give you 6 months to operate 3 robots. We'll give you another 6 months to operate another 3 robots. And then now there are 2 permits. One's held by us, one's held by COCO. And we're both able to operate up to 40 units in West Hollywood. And West Hollywood isn't huge. It isn't a huge city. And I think that's like a real testament to the fact that we were able to take what we learned and apply it as we went along and share those insights with the city. So that's, I think, one way in which we've been able to engage in successful pilots. But the challenge is sometimes, we've come to commercial viability, and there'll still be cities that'll be like, we'd like to see a pilot demonstration. And there's nothing that we're going to get out of a pilot demonstration at this point, or if we're operating commercially. So it's a little, we've now run into this chicken and egg problem with new markets in which we're expanding to. And I think figuring out those standards so that cities can share their learnings, and MDS is a great example of this, creates an opportunity so that now when we expand to another city and we say, look, like this is how we're operating there, the city doesn't have to get cold feet immediately.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm walking away from this panel as a huge advocate for server robotics. Clay, do you have your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think Viggy really hit the nail on the head for the inclusion piece. I mean, so many people come to us and they're like, we want to do this pilot of X technology. And I think they expect us to be really excited about it. But the reality is, I mean, we're like 5% excited about the innovation and new technology. And I'm the chief innovation officer. But like politically and from a community standpoint, I mean, we are 95% trying to figure out like what is the value, who is the end customer, is there some like, and this is a big issue we're facing right now with like eVTOL and UAM. Everyone comes to us and says, this is great, you need to do this. And it's like, how many people can you put in the sky from this community which has been underserved by transit in another place? But if you can't answer those questions, then how can we put money behind it or put our names behind it as a city? It's really hard for us. And I can't tell you the number of times that we have literally done a press conference. I've gotten the mayor up on stage to announce X company coming to San Jose to offer micromobility perhaps, or some autonomous vehicle service. And it never actually happens because the company goes up under like so fast that they never even launched, or they launched for like 4 days and then they go under. And I think there's like a pilot fatigue that cities face after a while, especially after the hype cycle is kind of more mature on something like micromobility. We're like, okay, another micromobility company, guys. Like, are you gonna like just throw out a bunch of things on the street and then we're gonna pick them up, or is there gonna be value? And what kind of investments are you making in hiring people here? And how committed are you to actually, building in this market? This is the one thing where cities I think do deserve to be special snowflakes. Is like, we really care that the companies that are coming to San Jose actually want to build their footprint there, and it's not just some random new market.
This is really good to know. I think for all of us private technology providers and private operators, I think we have maybe 1 or 2 minutes left, and so I wanted to see, 5 minutes late, perfect. Does anybody in the audience have any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah. Hi there.
I can repeat the question.
I'll just shout.
Okay.
Thanks for the great conversation. Maybe it just came up. Thanks for the great conversation. I wanted to get back to... Try this again.
That works.
There it is. Thanks for the great conversation. My name is Kagan Maher. I've previously done a lot of work with OMF, City of Santa Monica. I'm now working more in the payments space, and I wanted to actually get back to the equity question as it relates to payments. When we talk about public transit, of course, there's things like senior discounts. Those are federally mandated. If you take federal dollars, you must provide a senior discount as a bus operator. So maybe for Clay to start with from the policy side, where do you see equity in payments coming down the pike, for example, for eVTOLs or some of these other micromobility options, especially when we talk about a multimodal trip where maybe a senior starts their trip on the bus, they get their senior discount, and then they finish their trip in a car share. Do they get their senior discount there too? So maybe from the policy perspective and then from the data perspective, is there a conversation happening around standardizing that, either the verification of that eligibility or how that process could play out, moving between the public and the private?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, we almost need like an OMF tool for fares. And, in a place like San Jose, we have so many, just looking at the public sector, so many transit agencies. For that one senior to take their trip, they might be interacting with 3 separate agencies that already have their own system, and we've already been trying to figure out the integration for that. So then you couple that with private sector providers and transportation. How do we ensure that that ride is as smooth as possible? Because if it's not, people are either struggling to figure out how to do the ride, or people that might ride transit are disincentivized from doing so, which is bad. And then we also have to think about how do we come up with interesting business models that could subsidize, rides for people who struggle to pay. And I think we're looking now at our transit systems, which are struggling and definitely in the sort of post-pandemic recovery to go back to the levels that they were at in terms of ridership and fare collection. But if you look at fare collection for some of our lines, it's almost like a negligible number at this point. It doesn't make sense that because we're losing so much money and we're still charging people, and sometimes we're charging people and sometimes we're not charging people. So that is even inequitable. So I think there's a lot of innovation to come on how we actually do the business models for transit, and then the standardization piece, given all the private sector operators and what we're trying to do with public sector.
I'm willing to wager that by the next CoMotion, there's going to be some blockchain company that's trying to hawk a transfer service.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add, and I'm not my area of expertise, so I won't get into too much detail, but what LA is doing, what LA is in partnership with LA Metro, and then what the city of Pittsburgh is doing with Universal Basic Mobility.
Right.
I think that is the closest thing that I know of that's getting to that idea of kind of a seamless mobility wallet that allows somebody, and especially someone that meets some lower income qualifications, to be able to access everything from public transit as well as a suite of private mobility options. Hopefully we will see, speaking of pilots, I mean, it's like Pittsburgh is playing this out. It seems like it's proving to be successful. I know LA is going to take that and do their LA thing where it's going to be on a much bigger scale, but hopefully they will continue to show progress in providing really a seamless integration across public and private mobility options for those who need it most. Now, I don't think we have time necessarily to on this panel to get into what's needed to help that from a kind of a data standardization or even a data sharing perspective, because there are still a lot of barriers to true sharing across different private mobility options.
I just add this idea of the mobility wallet is going to be fascinating, not only from the public-facing aspect of it, but also operationally from the city. Because if the city can manage a mobility wallet and they're managing fewer transactions, which is a lower cost to the city, which can then be reverted to greater access within the community. To your point about next year at CoMotion, I think this whole mobility wallet conversation, I think, will be a lot further along. Will be fascinating to watch.
We're out of time. It's a wonderful note to end on. Looking forward to next CoMotion. Thank you very much, speakers. I've learned so much and walking away with a lot of new ideas. Thank you.
Thank y'all.